There is something about Chicago in the 1970s that stays with people who lived through it. The brutal winters, the machine politics, the neighborhoods where everybody knew everybody, and the music that changed the world. If someone grew up there, they remember exactly what that decade felt like. This was a time when Chicago was still the city that worked. The stockyards may have been closing, but the factories were still humming. The L trains rattled through neighborhoods where Polish, Italian, Irish, and Black communities lived in their own distinct worlds. By the end of the decade, disco would explode out of Chicago's South Side and change music forever. This was the decade that gave us Sears Tower, the 1977 blizzard that paralyzed the city, Walter Payton, and a political machine that controlled everything. The old Chicago was fading, and a new one was being born. Let us walk through what daily life actually felt like in the Windy City during that unforgettable decade. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it reveals just how different things were. Let us step into that world. Living in Chicago in the 1970s meant living in neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods had distinct identities that outsiders could barely understand. The city was a patchwork of ethnic enclaves. Pilsen was Mexican, Bridgeport was Irish, Taylor Street was Italian until urban renewal tore it apart. The Northwest Side was heavily Polish, with churches that held masses in Polish and bakeries selling paczki. The South Side had large Black communities in places like Bronzeville, Chatham, and South Shore. These neighborhoods were not just where people lived, they were complete worlds. You could be born, go to school, get married, work, and die without ever really leaving your neighborhood. People knew each other. They went to the same churches, shopped at the same corner stores, and sent their kids to the same Catholic schools. The parish was the center of neighborhood life for many Chicagoans. Catholic churches anchored communities. Saint Sabina, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Saint Stanislaus. These were not just places of worship. They were community centers, social clubs, and the glue that held neighborhoods together. There were Friday fish fries in church basements, bingo nights, and CYO basketball leagues. The priest knew every family by name. Housing stock in Chicago was distinctive. The brick bungalow was everywhere on the northwest and southwest sides. These sturdy 1.5-story homes with their small front porches and gangways between houses defined working-class Chicago. 3 flats were common, where extended families might live on different floors. Grandmother downstairs, parents and kids upstairs. The architecture told you where you were. The gray stones of Bronzeville, the 2 flats of Bridgeport, the high rises of the lakefront. Each neighborhood had its own look. Chicago weather in the 1970s was a force of nature that shaped daily life. Summers were hot and humid. People sat on stoops and front porches trying to catch a breeze. Air conditioning was becoming more common, but was far from universal. Families would go to the beach at North Avenue, or Oak Street, or one of the South Side beaches. The lakefront was free and democratic. Everyone could escape the heat the same way. But it was winter that truly defined Chicago. The cold came down from Canada, and the wind off Lake Michigan cut through any coat. Temperatures dropped below zero regularly. The snow piled up, but nothing compared to the blizzard of 1977. In January 1977, back-to-back blizzards buried Chicago under more than 2 feet of snow. The city ground to a halt. Cars were abandoned on Lakeshore Drive. The L trains stopped running. People were trapped in their homes for days. The city that worked did not work anymore. That winter would eventually cost Mayor Michael Bilandic his job and help elect Jane Byrne. But that is getting ahead of the story. The political machine that Richard J. Daley built dominated Chicago throughout the early 1970s. Daley had been mayor since 1955, and he ruled the city with absolute authority. Patronage jobs kept the machine running. If you wanted a city job, you went through your ward committeeman. If you wanted a pothole fixed, you called your alderman. Everything was personal. Everything was political. The democratic machine delivered votes and in return controlled everything. This was the city where dead people were rumored to vote and where elections were won in the back rooms before voters ever cast a ballot. Daley's Chicago was efficient in its own corrupt way. The garbage got picked up. The streets got plowed. But reform was not welcome. When Daley died suddenly in December 1976, Chicago lost more than a mayor. It lost the man who had defined the city for a generation. The battles over who would succeed him would shape Chicago politics for decades. The factories still employed hundreds of thousands of Chicagoans in the 1970s, though the decline was already beginning. U.S. Steel at South Works, Wisconsin Steel, the International Harvester plants, Western Electric in Cicero. These were the jobs that built the middle class. A man could graduate from high school, get a job at the plant, and support a family. The work was hard and dangerous, but it paid well and offered security. But signs of trouble were everywhere. Plants were aging. Foreign competition was growing. The stockyards that had made Chicago the hog butcher for the world had already closed in 1971. The meatpacking jobs that had drawn waves of immigrants were gone. The future was uncertain, but most people did not see the full collapse that was coming in the 1980s. Before we continue with the music and culture that defined this era, if you're enjoying this look back at how people really lived and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how Americans built the lives we know today. Getting around Chicago in the 1970s meant the L, the buses, and the car. The Chicago Transit Authority ran a system that connected the city. The EL trains, with their distinctive rumble, ran through neighborhoods on elevated tracks. The Brown Line ran through the north side. The Dan Ryan trains ran through the south side. Riding the L was an education in Chicago itself. You could see the city pass by outside the window, from the loop outward into neighborhoods. Most families owned cars, often American-made. Chevrolets and Fords were bought from dealers on Western Avenue or Ashland. Driving in Chicago meant knowing which routes to take and which neighborhoods to avoid. Lakeshore Drive was beautiful, but could be treacherous in winter. The expressways, like the Kennedy and the Dan Ryan, moved traffic, but were already getting congested. Parking was street parking for most people. DBs was the unwritten rule. If you shoveled out a parking spot in winter, you put a chair or a bucket in it to hold your place. Taking someone's dibs spot was a serious violation that could get your car keyed, or worse. This was Chicago. People had their own rules. Shopping meant different things in different parts of the city. State Street was still the heart of retail Chicago. Marshall Fields, with its great clock and Tiffany ceiling, was where people dressed up to go shopping. Carson Pirie Scott was right there too. Going downtown to shop was an event. But neighborhood shopping was where daily life happened. Jewel and Dominic's for groceries. The corner hardware store. The butcher shop where the owner knew what cuts you liked. Polished delis on Milwaukee Avenue. Italian grocers on Taylor Street. Mexican panaderias in Pilsen. Each neighborhood had its own commercial strip where you could walk to get what you needed. Sears Tower opened in 1973 and became the tallest building in the world. For Chicagoans, it was a source of immense pride. Chicago had built the biggest, the tallest, the best. The Sears catalog had been a staple of American homes for decades, and now the company had planted its flag in the Chicago skyline. Food in Chicago in the 1970s was hearty and ethnic. Italian beef sandwiches dripping with juice, topped with hot giardiniera. Chicago-style hot dogs with mustard, onion relish, tomato, pickle, sport peppers, and celery salt on a poppy seed bun. Never ketchup. Deep dish pizza at Lou Malnati's or Pizzeria Uno. Gyros from the Greek places on Halsted. Every neighborhood had its own food traditions, pierogi and kielbasa in the Polish neighborhoods, carnitas and tamales in Mexican areas. Soul food on the south side. Sunday dinner was a production. Extended family gathered around a table loaded with food. The music coming out of Chicago in the 1970s was about to change the world, though most people did not know it yet. Chicago blues was still thriving in clubs on the south side and west side. Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Buddy Guy played venues where you could see legends for the price of a drink. But something new was brewing. In the mid and late 1970s, DJs at Southside clubs started experimenting with new sounds. The seeds of house music were being planted, though the explosion would not come until the 1980s. Chicago was about to give the world a new kind of dance music that would spread from the warehouse nightclub to every corner of the globe. Chicago also had a thriving soul and R&B scene. Curtis Mayfield was doing some of his best work. The Chi-Lites were having hits. Earth, Wind, and Fire had Chicago connections. The music coming from Chicago was sophisticated and innovative. The rock band Chicago, despite the name, was actually from the city and had massive success in the 1970s. Their horn-driven rock produced hit after hit. Color My World, Saturday in the Park, If You Leave Me Now. They brought Chicago's name to radio stations across America. Sports in Chicago in the 1970s was a religion, but it was often a religion of suffering. The Cubs played day games at Wrigley Field. The ivy-covered walls packed with fans who had not seen a World Series since 1945. The White Sox played on the south side at Old Comiskey Park, a stadium with character and history. Neither team was very good in the 1970s, but the fans kept coming. The Bears played at Soldier Field by the lake. Walter Payton arrived in 1975 and immediately became the most exciting player in football. Sweetness was something to believe in during years when the team itself struggled. Watching Payton run was worth the price of admission. The Blackhawks had loyal fans at Chicago Stadium, the old barn on Madison Street where the noise was deafening. Bobby Hull had left for the WHA, but Stan Mikita was still skating. The Bulls were building something, though the Jordan years were more than a decade away. Childhood in Chicago in the 1970s meant playing outside until the streetlights came on. Kids played in alleys and on sidewalks. 16-inch softball was the neighborhood game, played without gloves, because that was the Chicago way. They played street hockey with taped-up sticks. They played stickball against the side of buildings. Summer meant going to the neighborhood pool, or running through the spray of an open fire hydrant. The ice cream truck came down the street, playing its song. Kids played in the gangways between houses. They rode bikes everywhere with no helmets and no fear. Winters meant sledding at any hill you could find, and building snow forts. Snowball fights could turn serious. They came home with frozen fingers and a runny nose and warmed up with hot chocolate. Television brought the city together. UGN was the local superstation. People watched the Cubs during the day if they were homesick from school. The Bozo Show aired in the morning. Creature Features aired on weekend nights. Local news anchors like Fahey Flynn and Joel Daley were celebrities in their own right. What defined Chicago in the 1970s was its toughness and its neighborhood soul. This was a working-class city where people built things, fixed things, and did not complain. The winters were brutal. The politics were corrupt. The factories were starting to close, but people looked out for each other. Neighborhoods had identity and pride. You knew who you were based on where you came from. The decade saw the death of Daley and the end of an ERA. It saw Sears Tower rise and the stockyards fall. It saw the seeds of house music planted in South Side clubs. It saw Walter Payton dance through defensive lines. For those who lived through it, 1970s Chicago was a city of brick bungalows and 3 flats, of parish festivals and corner taverns, of fierce neighborhood loyalty and brutal Lake Michigan winters. It was a city that worked, even when it struggled. A city where the political machine ran everything. And everybody knew somebody who could help. A city that was about to change dramatically, but did not know it yet. For those with memories of this remarkable era in the Windy City, there is always more history to explore.